In this video, I will be showing you how to tie into this particular two-story home addition project, and that will be building the area right here, or the stairwell area, and then of course tying in the existing roof rafters or truss roof rafters from the other roof. So let's go ahead and take a quick tour here. So let's go ahead and remove the sheathing, the framing, and take a look at the existing roof and what we needed to do to make it work, because we needed to cut a certain amount of roof trusses. And one of the easiest ways to rebuild a roof like that will be to use conventional framing. And here we have a double roof rafter that is going to support this beam that of course will be supporting a couple of more rafters. And let's take a look at the gable roof truss that needed to be cut. We cut the bottom off of the truss and then nailed these pieces to the new roof rafter. And then I simply cut the end off of this truss here and then used a hanger. And I'm not worried about the hanger sticking up because I wanted the additional support for the truss. And I could always notch the sheathing around the hanger. And the roof crickets will be covering all of this up where we see that this is not flat. And we got a couple of boards sticking up and our hanger, of course. And I will cover that in another video. And the ceiling in the living room and the dining room is going to be flat. So the original trusses were scissor trusses and probably had about a 2 12 pitch, and we're going to bring that all the way into the dining room. And of course, here's another view of the gable roof truss that was at the end of the wall right here in the original house. And we will nail the webbing from the existing trusses into our new rafters to provide additional support for the top chord of the roof truss. And what we're looking at here is the extended wall. This was the original wall height, and I went ahead and raised the wall so that it would blend into the ceiling and help provide additional support for our roof rafters. And yes, believe it or not, this house is still standing. And even though I'm not providing you with all of the structural engineering information, I will be going through that later on. And we will need to add a 2x4 rafter extension here to pick up the fascia board and finish off the roof sheathing. And that will have a 1-inch gap in between the existing wall and the rafter, because we are going to be installing stucco, and we will be installing a couple of blocks so that we can tie the roof sheathing into the floor framing here to provide us with a nice structural connection, and our double hanger to support the double rafter. And again, we're going to nail the top chord of the roof truss to the roof rafter. View of the gable roof truss that has been cut from above, and again we will nail this with 16D nails, and we will be using 16D nails for everything except for the roof sheathing, and some of the building hardware will have different size nails also. And for those of you who are not familiar with cutting trusses, you can usually replace it with roof rafters, and in our case we are going to lower the roof rafter so that the bottom of the rafter will represent our ceiling height, and we will nail each rafter to the existing trusses. And before you do something like this, you might need to check with the structural engineer. And when I used to work a lot, we had to figure this stuff out as we went, but that might not be the case today or in the future. And a top view here where we have our double roof rafter that will be supporting the beam that will be sitting on top of the wall. And of course, a good view of each truss that would have needed to have a roof rafter installed next to it. And these roof rafters need to go from point A to point B. And in some situations, you might need to install ceiling joist, something like a 2x6 or a 2x8, and change the on-center layout. For example, we have 2-foot on-center trusses. However, we might need to change it to 16 inches or 12 inches on-center, depending upon the project and the span of the building. And here we have a view at how the 4x10 beam connects to the double roof rafter to continue the flat ceiling, along with our shaped blocks so that we can nail the roof sheathing a little easier, along with our nailer here and our blocks on the other side that will be supporting the roof sheathing. So these blocks will provide us with some perimeter nailing. And something like this was all I needed back then. However, you might need to tie the roof trusses into the floor somehow today or even in the future. So keep that in mind. And another view of our rake wall here that we have built to extend the wall up in that area, and a better idea of how the ceiling plane is going to die in, how it is going to be flat all the way through. Next up, let's take a closer look at the support beam, and you can see here where the weight from this rafter is going to be transferred to the beam, which is going to be transferred to the doubler, which is going to be transferred to this beam, and then down both sides of the walls, this side and then the other side. And enough of the inside, let's go back to the outside where we can throw some roof sheathing back on, give you an idea of how everything's going to tie in here. And again, we are going to have a roof drainage cricket in this area. And then of course we have a block so that we can pick up our perimeter nailing here. And even though I extended the roof sheathing down here, this could be a problem for our insulation. And that would be a problem to consider if you were doing a project like this. And of course, after we have installed our roof sheathing and nailed all of the perimeter nailing is usually going to be different than the field nailing. And the field nailing is usually going to be the area in between the edges of the plywood, OSB, or whatever you're using for roof sheathing. Next up, let's go ahead and install one of the walls. And this wall will have an angled bottom, and this wall will plane into this section here, so that when we drywall this area, it will be flat. And that's the reason why we're back here a little bit, and the reason why this framing plate doesn't go all the way to the edge. Next up, let's go ahead and install the side walls. And in these walls, we will have a window at each end. And again, this area here will also have a roof drainage cricket installed. So we don't need to get really technical about this stuff blending in perfectly flat with anything. And I went ahead and notched the wall framing studs over the sheathing, because if you remember, we have a doubler here, 3 inches here and 3.5 inches here, which means we're going to have to do some notching. Next up, let's go ahead and throw some roof rafters in there. And these rafters will lap here so that we can nail this rafter here into this one to create a nice structural tie through here. And for those of you wondering why we're using 2x10 here instead of 2x6, that's because we're going to need to insulate this area. And if you live in an area where R30 isn't going to be enough, then you might need to use larger rafters. So the stairwell will basically have a vaulted ceiling area, or the drywall will be attaching to the bottom of the rafters. And I went ahead and installed these blocks so that I could nail them to the face of the wall framing instead of sitting on top, to provide me with what I think would be a better connection. However, your engineer might not agree with that and require the blocks to be sitting on top of the wall framing plate. And of course, we had to shape the rafter tails so that we could use 2x8 fascia board. So let's go ahead and wrap this video up by taking one last look at the fascia board, along with the blocking that we used for our rafters down here. And as always, if you have any questions, or if you didn't get a good look at something, let me know. Leave a comment or question in the video comment area, and I will address the issue or answer the question as soon as possible. And for those of you wondering where the stair video is, I put that video on my stair building YouTube channel, and we'll put a link to it in the video description area.